In the parlance of professional church people, today is known as Low Sunday. Well, Easter is an entire season, not just a day. It is hard to deny the letdown after last week's festival services. Compared to Easter, church attendance takes a dive. The only candy left in the Easter baskets is the stuff that turns your tongue ungodly colors, black jelly beans and blue peeps. And the Easter flowers are starting to look a little tired around the edges. Like Thomas, we hear the stories of Jesus' resurrection and think, when do I get some of that? I want to experience the resurrection. Thomas is popularly known as Doubting Thomas, but I think that designation casts an unfairly negative shadow on Thomas. Elsewhere in the Gospels, Thomas is portrayed as a model disciple. Thomas was grieving the loss of his beloved teacher, and now he was being asked to believe that Jesus had been resurrected. People don't just rise from the dead. Imagine waking from a coma to be told that the Cubs had won the World Series. Even the most devoted Cubbies fan would want to see before they really believed. Now, a show of hands. How many of you know what an emoticon is? Very good. How many of you use emoticons in your text messages and emails? Good, so a bunch of you do. Wonderful. Emoticons are pictorial representations of facial expressions. In the absence of body language, they serve to communicate the tenor and temper of a sender's message. The emoticon expresses, usually by means of punctuation mark, a person's mood or feelings. For example, put a colon, a dash, and a closed parentheses together, and you have a smiling face. Apps are now available for your electronic devices that provide hundreds of stylized pictures in place of the punctuation marks. Well, the popularity of emoticons has exploded with the rise of text-based electronic communication. Emoticons have actually been in use since the 1850s, and scholars debate whether Abraham Lincoln used an emoticon in one of his speeches. The Bible might benefit from an emoticon or two. Don't you think biblical interpretation would be somewhat easier if we knew whether Jesus was smiling or frowning when he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe." Did Jesus say this compassionately, or did he say it angrily? I like to imagine Jesus smiling here, welcoming Thomas and us to seek what we need in order to believe in the resurrection. 3 times in this gospel, the writer of John's gospel points to Jesus' wounds as evidence of the resurrection. One would think, since Jesus is the Son of God, he could have been resurrected in perfection, wounds healed. Now it's true, Jesus' wounded hands and side serve as proof that he is the same man that hung and died on a cross. Yet I believe there is more to this than that. The resurrection is most keenly seen and experienced in our woundedness. We notice the flower that pushes up through the cement in a blighted landscape. That same flower in a lush and verdant garden is just another plant, not a sign of God's power to restore life. In the midst of our pain and loss, right smack dab in the middle of our doubts and fears, God is uniquely present with us. I have been preaching resurrection for over a dozen years. telling people that evidence of God's power to restore life is within us and all around us all the time. Invariably, after such a sermon, someone will come to me, just like Thomas, and demand proof. They want to see and touch resurrection before they will believe. Several years ago now, a woman I will call Beverly lost her husband Greg in a tragic car accident. Angrily, she pleaded to know when she would get to experience resurrection. Beverly and I prayed together that she would feel God present with her, working resurrection in her life. I also reminded Beverly that we do not get to choose what resurrection looks like. If believing in resurrection meant that Greg had to walk back through her kitchen door, then Beverly would be bitterly disappointed and blind to God's transformational power. More recently, Beverly messaged me on Facebook to tell me that her first grandchild had been born on the anniversary of Greg's death. She said at first she was sad and even a little angry that the child had been born on such a terrible day. But then she realized that the birth of her grandchild was the sign that she had been waiting for. She was experiencing resurrection. She also told me that she could look back now and see the innumerable ways God had been plotting resurrection in her life. In the patience of family and friends, in the kindness of strangers, and even in her recently renewed ability to flirt. Our woundedness has a way of creating the stark contrast we humans seem to need to catch glimpses and glimmers of resurrection in our lives. Perhaps this is why some people, those who deny their brokenness and those too young to have suffered much loss, struggle to see a need for faith in their lives. Yet, like Thomas, once we have seen and touched resurrection, the experience changes everything. We have hope for the future, and we find redemption and meaning in the hurt, loss, and doubt of our past. We too can proclaim Jesus, our Lord and our God. Towards the end of his life, the poet Robert Frost was asked if he had hope for the future. Frost responded that yes, he had hope for the future, but he also had hope for the past. This is the gift of the resurrection. No life is without pain and loss and suffering and doubt. Jesus' resurrection is God's promise, a promise that there is new life right smack dab in the midst of our darkest places, a promise that not even death can separate us from God's love. In the light of that promise, we can make some meaning of the things done and the things left undone in our past. Another poet, David Ray, found resurrection in Frost's notion that one could have hope for the past, and he wrote a poem called Thanks, Robert Frost. In closing, I offer you David Ray's tender words. Do you have hope for the future? Someone asked Robert Frost toward the end of his life. Yes, and even for the past, he replied, that it will turn out to have been all right for what it was, something we can accept. Mistakes made by the selves we had to be, not able to be, perhaps what we wished, or what looking back half the time seems we could so easily have been, or ought. The future, yes, and even the past, that it will become something we can bear. And I too and my children, so I hope, will recall as not too heavy the tug of those albatrosses I sadly placed upon their tender necks. Hope for the past, yes, old frost, your words provide that courage, and it brings strange peace that itself passes into past, easier to bear because you said it, rather casually as snow went on falling in Vermont years ago.